The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just an hour earlier. The royal seal bore news that would change everything for her family, but more importantly, for thousands of children across the United Kingdom. William found her there, still in her silk nightgown, tears streaming down her face. He didn't need to ask what the letter contained. They had been waiting for this response for months, ever since they had quietly submitted their proposal to establish a new foundation focused on mental health support for children who had lost parents. "They said yes," Catherine whispered, not turning from the window. "The Queen approved it all. The funding, the royal patronage, everything." William wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on both their shoulders. This wasn't just another royal duty or ceremonial ribbon cutting. This was personal. This was their way of honoring the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales, while addressing a crisis that had been growing silently across Britain. The idea had come to Catherine during a visit to a children's hospital in Manchester 6 months earlier. She had been there for what was supposed to be a routine royal engagement, opening a new wing and meeting with staff. But as she walked through the corridors, she noticed something that the official tour hadn't planned for her to see. In a quiet corner of the pediatric ward, a young girl no more than 8 years old sat alone, clutching a worn teddy bear. The child's mother had just passed away from cancer, and her father was struggling to cope while working 3 jobs to pay for medical bills. The little girl, Emma, had stopped speaking entirely since her mother's death 3 weeks earlier. Catherine had asked to spend time with Emma, despite the protests of her security team about deviating from the schedule. She sat on the floor in her elegant dress, not caring about the protocols or the photographers waiting outside. For 20 minutes, she simply sat with Emma in comfortable silence, occasionally humming soft lullabies that her own mother had sung to her as a child. When Emma finally spoke, it was to ask a question that would haunt Catherine for weeks. "Will you be my mummy now? Mine went to heaven, and I don't think she's coming back." Catherine had maintained her composure in that moment, gently explaining that while she couldn't be Emma's mummy, there were people who cared about her and wanted to help her feel safe and loved again. But driving home that evening, she had broken down completely, sobbing in William's arms about the thousands of children like Emma who were suffering in silence. That night, they had stayed up until dawn, researching statistics about childhood bereavement in the UK. The numbers were staggering. Over 100,000 children lost a parent each year, and many of them received little to no professional support to process their grief. Existing programs were underfunded and often had waiting lists that stretched for months. William shared his own memories of losing his mother at 12 years old, describing the anger and confusion that had consumed him for years. Despite having access to the best counselors and support systems money could buy, he had still struggled deeply with his grief. How much harder must it be, he wondered, for children who had no support system at all? They began working on their proposal in secret, consulting with child psychologists, grief counselors, and families who had experienced loss. Catherine threw herself into research with the same intensity she had once applied to her art history studies. She read every book and academic paper she could find about childhood bereavement, often staying up until 2 a.m. taking notes while William slept beside her. The foundation they envisioned would be different from existing charities. Instead of just providing counseling services, it would create a comprehensive support network for grieving children and their families. There would be residential retreats where children could spend time with others who understood their pain. There would be trained volunteers who could provide immediate support when a child lost a parent. Most importantly, there would be no waiting lists and no fees. But creating a royal foundation required approval from the monarch herself. The proposal had to be submitted through proper channels, reviewed by palace advisors, and ultimately approved by the Queen. For months, Catherine and William had waited anxiously, knowing that their plans could be rejected if deemed too ambitious or politically sensitive. Now, holding the approval letter, Catherine felt a mixture of joy and terror. They had the green light to move forward, but with that came enormous pressure to succeed. This wouldn't be just another royal patronage where they showed up for photo opportunities and fundraising galas. This would require them to be hands-on, to really make a difference in children's lives. "We should call Emma's father," Catherine said suddenly, still looking out at the gardens. "She should be one of the first children we help." William smiled, remembering the story Catherine had told him about the brave little girl in Manchester. "I'll have someone track down her contact information. But Kate, we need to be prepared for how big this is going to become. Once word gets out about what we're doing, there will be thousands of families reaching out for help." Catherine finally turned to face her husband, her eyes still damp but filled with determination. "Then we'll help thousands of families. We'll hire the best staff, train the best volunteers, and create something that actually makes a difference. I don't want any child to feel as alone as Emma did that day." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings and planning sessions. They worked with architects to design a headquarters that would feel welcoming to children rather than institutional. They interviewed potential staff members, looking for people who combined professional expertise with genuine compassion. Catherine insisted on being involved in every detail, from the color of the walls to the selection of books for the children's library. They decided to call the foundation Diana's Promise, honoring William's mother while also conveying their commitment to the children they would serve. The name felt right to both of them, capturing the spirit of service and love that Diana had embodied. As word of their plans began to leak to the media, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Editorials praised the royal couple for taking on such a meaningful cause. Donations began pouring in from around the world, including large contributions from celebrities who had themselves experienced childhood loss. But with the positive attention also came increased scrutiny. Some critics questioned whether the royal family should be involved in such emotionally sensitive work. Others worried about the privacy of the children who would be served by the foundation. Catherine found herself lying awake at night, wondering if they had bitten off more than they could chew. The turning point came during their first official foundation meeting, held in a conference room at Kensington Palace. Around the table sat grief counselors, child psychologists, social workers, and representatives from existing bereavement charities. Catherine had prepared extensively for the meeting, creating detailed presentations about their vision and goals. But as the meeting progressed, she found herself setting aside her prepared remarks and speaking from the heart instead. She told the assembled experts about Emma, about the moment that had inspired this entire endeavor. She talked about her own fears as a mother, imagining how devastating it would be for George, Charlotte, and Louis to lose her or William. When she finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned child psychologist who had initially been skeptical about royal involvement in her field, spoke up first. "Your Royal Highness," she said quietly, "I've been working with grieving children for 25 years, and I've never heard anyone articulate the need as clearly as you just did. If you're truly committed to this work, not just as a patroness but as an active participant, then I believe we can create something extraordinary." That meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter for Catherine and William. They weren't just adding another charity to their list of royal duties. They were embarking on a mission that would require them to be vulnerable, to share their own experiences with loss and grief, and to stand alongside families during their darkest moments. As autumn arrived and the foundation's opening date approached, Catherine found herself thinking often about Emma, the little girl whose question had started it all. She wondered if Emma was talking more now, if she had found ways to remember her mother while also embracing the possibility of joy in her life again. Soon, Catherine hoped, Emma and thousands of children like her would have a place where their grief was understood, where their questions were answered with patience and love, and where they could begin to heal while keeping the memory of their lost parents alive in their hearts. The silent step forward they were taking would soon echo across a nation, touching lives in ways they were only beginning to imagine. 6 months after receiving royal approval, the Diana's Promise Foundation opened its doors for the first time. Catherine stood in the main lobby of their headquarters in London, watching as the first group of children and families arrived for what they were calling Healing Hearts Weekend. The building, a converted Victorian mansion in Bloomsbury, had been transformed into something that felt more like a warm family home than an institutional facility. Emma was among the first children to walk through the doors. Now 9 years old, she had grown taller and her voice was stronger, but Catherine could still see traces of the frightened little girl she had met in the hospital. Emma's father, David, accompanied her, looking nervous but hopeful. "Princess Catherine!" Emma called out, running across the lobby with more energy than Catherine had ever seen from her. "I can't believe you remembered me." Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, taking her small hands in hers. "How could I forget you? You were the one who taught me how important this place needed to be." Over the past months, Catherine had personally overseen every aspect of the Foundation's development. She had spent countless hours working with child psychologists to design programs that would truly meet children's needs. Unlike traditional grief counseling, which often relied heavily on talking through feelings, Diana's Promise incorporated art therapy, music therapy, and even animal-assisted therapy. The Foundation's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of treating grief as a problem to be solved, they treated it as a journey to be supported. Children weren't expected to get over the loss of their parents. Instead, they were helped to find ways to carry their love for their lost parents with them as they grew and changed. William had initially worried that Catherine was becoming too emotionally invested in the Foundation's work. She often came home from planning meetings with red eyes, having heard heartbreaking stories from families they hoped to help. But as he watched her interact with Emma and the other children that first weekend, he realized that her emotional connection wasn't a weakness. It was the Foundation's greatest strength. The first day's activities included something called memory making, where children created art projects that honored their lost parents. Emma chose to paint a picture of herself and her mother baking cookies together, one of her favorite memories from before her mother became sick. As she painted, she chattered away to Catherine about how her mother used to let her lick the spoon and how they would always burn the first batch because they were too busy laughing to watch the timer. Catherine found herself crying as she listened to Emma's story, not from sadness but from joy at seeing how this little girl had found a way to speak about her mother with love rather than just pain. It was exactly what they had hoped the Foundation could achieve. The weekend also included sessions for the parents and guardians who were struggling to support their grieving children. David attended workshops on how to talk to children about death, how to maintain family traditions while creating new ones, and how to take care of his own grief while being strong for his daughter. During a quiet moment on Saturday afternoon, David approached Catherine as she sat in the garden watching children play on the specially designed playground equipment. "Your Royal Highness," he said, sitting down beside her on the bench, "I need you to know what this place has already meant to our family. Emma has been talking about this weekend for weeks. It's the first time since her mother died that I've seen her excited about anything." Catherine turned to face him, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes that she had learned to recognize in all the bereaved parents she had met. "How are you doing, David? I know how hard it must be to take care of Emma while dealing with your own grief." David was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter chase butterflies with two other children who had also lost parents. "Some days I feel like I'm drowning," he admitted. "I look at Emma, and I see her mother in every expression, every gesture. It breaks my heart, but it also keeps Sarah alive for me. Coming here, meeting other families going through the same thing, it helps me realize that we're not as alone as I thought we were." That evening, the foundation held its first Stars of Memory ceremony. Each child was given the opportunity to light a candle for their lost parent while sharing one happy memory. The ceremony was voluntary, with no pressure on children who weren't ready to participate publicly. Emma surprised everyone by volunteering to go first. Standing at the front of the room with a small white candle in her hands, she spoke in a clear, strong voice. "This candle is for my mummy, Sarah. She had the best hugs in the whole world, and she used to sing to me every night before bed. She taught me that love doesn't die when people go to heaven. It just changes shape, like how water becomes steam, but it's still water." Catherine had to step outside for a moment to compose herself. The wisdom in Emma's words, the way this child had found language for something many adults struggled to express, was overwhelming. When she returned to the room, she found William waiting for her in the hallway. "You should be proud," he said, pulling her into his arms. "What you've created here. It's giving these children something I never had when I lost my mother. It's giving them a place where their grief is honored, instead of something they need to hide." The weekend continued with activities designed to help children envision their futures while keeping their lost parents as part of their journey. They wrote letters to their parents telling them about their hopes and dreams. They planted seeds in small pots to take home, watching something beautiful grow as a symbol of how they could grow around their grief rather than just moving past it. On Sunday morning, Catherine woke up early and walked through the quiet foundation building. In just 2 days, the space had been transformed from an elegant but empty building into something alive with children's artwork, laughter echoing in the halls, and a sense of community that couldn't be manufactured or forced. She found herself in the memory garden, a peaceful outdoor space where families could sit quietly and remember their loved ones. A small plaque by the entrance read, "Grief is love with nowhere to go. Here, love finds its way back to your heart." Emma found her there, still in her pajamas from the sleepover portion of the weekend. "Princess Catherine, I wanted to give you something before I go home." Emma held out a small drawing she had made the night before. It showed 2 figures holding hands. One was clearly Emma, and the other was a woman in a tiara. "That's you," Emma explained, pointing to the tiara-wearing figure. "You're holding my hand while I talk to my mummy in heaven. I wanted you to know that you helped me find her again." Catherine knelt down and hugged Emma tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility and the joy of purpose combining in her heart. "Emma, you helped me find something too. You helped me understand that sometimes the most important things we can do are the quietest ones." As families began to leave that Sunday afternoon, Catherine and William stood at the entrance, saying goodbye to each child and parent personally. The feedback they received was overwhelming. Parents talked about how their children had slept better Saturday night than they had in months. Children asked when they could come back, whether they could write letters to Princess Catherine, whether their friends who had also lost parents could visit the foundation too. But the most powerful moment came when David and Emma were preparing to leave. Emma ran back to Catherine one last time. "I know you're a princess and you're very busy," she said seriously. "But could you maybe visit other hospitals and find more kids like me? Because this place makes the sad feelings feel a little bit lighter, and I think other kids should know about that too." Catherine promised Emma that they would do exactly that. The Foundation's mobile outreach program was already in development, designed to bring support directly to hospitals, schools, and communities, where grieving children might not otherwise receive help. As the last family's car disappeared down the street, Catherine and William walked back through their foundation building one more time. The walls were now covered with children's artwork, photos from the weekend's activities, and thank you notes that had been slipped under office doors. In the main activity room, they found a piece of paper that had been left on the art table. In a child's handwriting, it read, "Dear Princess Catherine and Prince William, thank you for making a place where being sad is okay, but being happy is okay too. Love, all of us." William picked up the note and handed it to Catherine. "I think," he said quietly, "that this is just the beginning." Catherine nodded, looking around at the evidence of the weekend's impact. Emma's question from that day in the hospital, whether Catherine could be her mother, had evolved into something much more profound. Catherine couldn't replace the mothers and fathers these children had lost, but she could help create a space where their love for their lost parents could coexist with hope for their futures. The Foundation's first weekend had exceeded all their expectations, but more importantly, it had proven that their approach was working. Children were leaving with tools for processing their grief. Parents were finding community and support, and families were discovering that healing didn't mean forgetting. As they locked up the building that evening, Catherine thought about the week ahead. There were more programs to plan, more staff to train, and hundreds of families on their waiting list hoping for support. The silent step forward they had taken was becoming a movement, one child and one family at a time. 2 years after the Diana's Promise Foundation opened its doors, Catherine stood before Parliament, preparing to deliver a speech that would change the landscape of childhood bereavement support in the United Kingdom forever. The Foundation's success had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations, and now the government was proposing to make their approach the national standard for supporting grieving children. The journey to this moment had been filled with both triumph and heartbreak. The Foundation now served over 3,000 families across the UK, with satellite locations in Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, and Cardiff. Emma, now 11 years old, had become one of their peer mentors, helping newly bereaved children navigate their first difficult months. But Catherine's mind wasn't on statistics or success stories as she prepared to speak. Instead, she was thinking about a letter that had arrived just that morning from a teacher in Wales. The letter told the story of 7-year-old Thomas, whose mother had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. Thomas had stopped eating, stopped playing with friends, and had begun telling his teacher that he wanted to go to heaven to find his mummy. The letter was one of hundreds that arrived at the Foundation each week, each representing a child in crisis, a family struggling to cope, a community unsure how to help. For every child they were able to serve, there were dozens more waiting for support that might not come in time. Catherine had barely slept the night before her speech, haunted by the knowledge that Thomas and children like him were suffering while she stood in palaces and gave interviews about the Foundation's success. The gap between what they had achieved and what was still needed felt overwhelming. William found her in their private study at Kensington Palace at 5 a.m., surrounded by drafts of her speech and statistics about childhood grief in the UK. "You know," he said gently, sitting beside her on the sofa, "my mother would be incredibly proud of what you've built. What you've both built." Catherine looked up from her papers, her eyes red from exhaustion and emotion. "But it's not enough, William. For every Emma who is thriving now, there are 10 children like Thomas who are drowning in their grief. The Foundation helps individual children beautifully, but we need systemic change." That morning's speech to Parliament was Catherine's attempt to advocate for exactly that kind of systemic change. She had spent months working with policy experts to develop a comprehensive proposal for integrating bereavement support into schools, hospitals, and social services across the country. Her speech began with Emma's story, the little girl whose simple question had sparked a movement. But as Catherine spoke, she shifted from talking about individual success stories to addressing the broader crisis of childhood grief in modern society. "Honorable members," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt, "we live in a society that has become increasingly uncomfortable with grief, particularly when it comes to children. We rush to offer quick fixes, to encourage children to move on or be strong. But what I have learned through the work of Diana's Promise is that children don't need to move on from their grief. They need to learn to carry it with love." The packed chamber was unusually quiet as Catherine continued. She spoke about the research the Foundation had conducted, showing that children who received immediate comprehensive bereavement support were significantly less likely to develop depression, anxiety, or behavioral problems later in life. She talked about the economic impact of untreated childhood grief, the strain it placed on healthcare and education systems. But most powerfully, she shared stories. She told Parliament about Marcus, a teenager who had transformed from an angry, failing student to a compassionate peer counselor after finding support at the Foundation. She spoke about Sarah, a single mother who had learned how to help her children grieve their father while managing her own overwhelming loss. "These children and families are not statistics," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger. "They are our neighbors, our students, our future leaders. When we fail to support them in their darkest moments, we fail as a society." The response to Catherine's speech was immediate and overwhelming. Standing ovations from both sides of the Parliament, editorial praise from newspapers across the political spectrum. Most importantly, a commitment from the Prime Minister to provide $50 million in government funding to expand bereavement support services nationwide. But the moment that meant the most to Catherine came 3 days after her speech, when Emma called her personally. Emma had watched the speech online and wanted to share something important. "Princess Catherine," Emma said, her voice bright and confident over the phone, "I wanted to tell you that my teacher showed our whole class your speech, and my friend Jamie started crying. His dad died last year and he's been really sad, but he didn't know there were places like Diana's Promise that could help him. I told him I would ask if he could come to the next family weekend." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride, not just for Emma's kindness, but for how completely this remarkable child had healed while still honoring her mother's memory. Emma had become living proof that children could grow around their grief rather than being defined by it. The expansion of Diana's Promise services began immediately. Mobile grief counseling units were deployed to rural areas where families might otherwise have no access to support. Schools across the country received training on how to identify and help grieving students. Hospital staff learned new protocols for supporting families facing loss. One of the most innovative programs was Grief Ambassadors, teenagers like Marcus, who had been helped by the Foundation and now work to support other young people experiencing loss. These peer counselors proved incredibly effective at reaching children who might be resistant to talking with adult counselors. Catherine threw herself into the expansion work with the same intensity she had brought to the Foundation's original development. She traveled to every new location personally, meeting with local staff and families. She insisted on being involved in training programs for the new counselors and volunteers they were hiring. During one particularly difficult week, when Catherine had been traveling for 6 days straight to open new Foundation offices, William began to worry that she was burning herself out. He found her in their bedroom at midnight, still on conference calls with staff in Edinburgh about a complex case involving a family with 4 grieving children. "Kate," he said after she hung up the phone, "you can't save every child personally. You've built something extraordinary, but you need to trust the team you've assembled to do the work." Catherine looked at him with tears in her eyes. "But what if we miss someone? What if there's a child out there right now who needs help and we don't reach them in time?" William sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll help the next child and the one after that. But if you exhaust yourself trying to help every child personally, you won't be able to help any of them. It was a difficult lesson for Catherine to learn. She had become so personally invested in every family the foundation served that she was struggling to maintain healthy boundaries. Working with a therapist, she slowly learned how to channel her passion for the work without carrying the weight of every family's pain on her own shoulders. The breakthrough came during a staff meeting 6 months after the parliamentary speech, when Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist who had become the foundation's clinical director, shared some remarkable statistics. Children who had gone through Diana's Promise programs were showing measurably better outcomes than children who had received traditional grief counseling. More importantly, many of these children were choosing to volunteer with the foundation as they grew older, creating a sustainable cycle of peer support. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Mitchell said, addressing Catherine directly, "what you've created here isn't just a charity or even a movement. It's a fundamental shift in how society approaches childhood grief. You've given an entire generation of children permission to grieve openly while still embracing joy and hope." That evening, Catherine received a package with no return address. Inside was a hand-painted picture from Thomas, the 7-year-old boy whose story had haunted her before the parliamentary speech. The painting showed a rainbow with a small boy and woman standing under it together. A note in careful handwriting read, "Dear Princess Catherine, this is me and my mummy in heaven. She told me in a dream that it's okay to be happy sometimes, even though I miss her. Thank you for helping me learn that. Love, Thomas." Attached to Thomas's letter was a note from his grandmother, explaining that Thomas had been accepted into the Foundation's emergency support program just 2 days after Catherine's speech to Parliament. 3 months later, he was eating regularly, playing with friends again, and had stopped talking about wanting to join his mother in heaven. Catherine sat in her study holding Thomas's painting, finally understanding what William had been trying to tell her. She didn't need to save every child personally, but the work she had started was creating ripple effects that would touch countless lives in ways she might never know about. The Foundation's 3rd anniversary celebration was held at the original London headquarters, with families from across the UK traveling to attend. Emma, now 12 and serving as the event's youth speaker, stood before an audience of hundreds of families who had been helped by Diana's Promise. 3 years ago, Emma said, her voice clear and confident, "I was a little girl who thought the world had ended when my mummy died. Princess Catherine sat with me in a hospital and showed me that even though the sad feelings would always be part of me, they didn't have to be all of me." Emma paused, looking directly at Catherine in the front row. "Now I know that my mummy isn't really gone. She's in every kind thing I do, every time I help another kid who is scared and sad, every time I remember that love is stronger than death. Princess Catherine didn't take away my sadness, but she helped me learn that I could be sad and happy at the same time." As the audience erupted in applause, Catherine felt a deep sense of completion. The silent step forward that had begun with one little girl's question had become a movement that was changing lives across the nation. Children were learning that grief was not something to be ashamed of or hidden away, but rather a reflection of deep love that could coexist with hope, joy, and dreams for the future. Later that evening, as families said their goodbyes and made plans to stay connected through the Foundation's ongoing support networks, Catherine stood in the memory garden where she had first understood the true potential of their work. William joined her there, along with Emma and her father David. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Princess Catherine," Emma said quietly, "do you think my mummy knows about all of this? Do you think she's proud of what we built together?" Catherine smiled, thinking about Diana and all the parents these children had lost, imagining them watching their children learn to carry love and grief together in their hearts. "I think," Catherine said, that all of our loved ones who have gone before us are incredibly proud, not just of what we built, but of how we learned that love never really ends. It just finds new ways to help and heal and bring people together. The nation that had watched their silent step forward with curiosity had indeed been moved to tears, not just of sadness for the children who had suffered loss, but tears of hope for a future where no child would have to grieve alone.